Thank you, Madam Chair. I, along with many others, have consistently and forcefully condemned political violence by anyone of any kind, whether it happens here in the United States Capitol or anywhere else across our country. Law and order is critical for us to preserve a peaceful republic, and anyone breaking our laws should be held accountable. This is what we refer to as equal justice for all. Beginning under President Trump, the FBI and the Department of Justice worked hard, tirelessly, to investigate and prosecute those who were involved in criminal behavior and violence here at the Capitol on January 6th, as well they should have. But I'm troubled that reportedly dozens of individuals from the January 6th riots have been held without bond in solitary confinement for up to 23 hours a day. Even Senator Elizabeth Warren has said that solitary confinement is a form of punishment that is cruel and psychologically damaging. She went on and said that in relation to those involved in January 6th, that we're talking about people who haven't been convicted of anything yet. Even the ACLU expressed similar concerns, saying that solitary confinement is torture. Director Wray, you have mentioned a couple of times now some 500-plus prosecutions from January 6th. Your work in that regard we all appreciate. I'm curious, though, how many of those are in solitary confinement?
Congressman, I thank you for your appreciation for our work. I don't know the number that would be held under those conditions. That's a decision made by the court in conjunction with the Justice Department prosecutors. So I'm afraid I don't have that number or estimate for you.
So you have no idea how many are in solitary confinement. This is something that's being pretty well reported. I would think you would have some degree of knowledge and information. You're saying you don't know.
I don't keep up on the terms of confinement or detention.
Would you consider it standard operating procedure to hold Americans who have yet to stand trial to be held in solitary confinement?
I'm not sure I could say one way or the other on that. Certainly there are plenty of situations where that occurs. So it would have to depend on the circumstances of the particular case, and I do want to be very careful not to be commenting.
Well, there's a great deal of concern with this. Let me move on. I started by early talking about equal justice for all. Last summer, our nation was rocked by months of violence all across our country following the death of George Floyd. In fact, from May 26 to June 8th last year, Black Lives Matter and Antifa riots caused over $2 billion in property damage. It's estimated here at the Capitol, it was on January 6th, somewhere in the neighborhood of $1.5 million. The Major Cities Chiefs Association said that during the 10 weeks following George Floyd's death, there were 574 riots, declared riots, with violence and other criminal activity. That's 57 per week. Americans lost their lives. There were severe injuries, including over 2,000 law enforcement. And yet the Democratic Party to this day has yet to even hold a single hearing on the BLM and Antifa riots. It's stunning to me. Many of my Democratic colleagues pretend that the chaos never happened. Others promoted, actually, and encouraged it. And frankly, the left, along with the allies of the liberal media, pushed a false narrative that these were somehow peaceful protests, while we watched burned police stations, besieged courthouses, looted businesses, assaulted police officers, and on and on and on. And I'm concerned, Director Wray, that we are, all that somehow is resulting in a less than aggressive investigation, prosecution, and sentencing on the federal level. So I'm curious, how many individuals has the FBI investigated and or arrested regarding the riots that we all watched across our country last summer?
I can't give you the exact number, but I do know that we've had hundreds of investigations and hundreds of arrests. And I would be remiss if I didn't say that I share your concern about the violence and criminality that occurred over the summer. It was extremely serious activity. We used all the tools in our toolbox to pursue our joint terrorism task forces, treating it as a form of domestic terrorism as well. And in fact, last year, we had more anarchist violent extremist arrests than we'd had in the prior 3 years combined. So we at the FBI are taking both forms of domestic terrorism extremely seriously, and I appreciate your interest.
Are you aware of any of those individuals being in solitary confinement?
Well, again, same answer as in connection with the January 6th arrest. I just
All right,
don't,
Director Wray, thank you. I get the point. I'd love to ask about the Durham report, the Hunter Biden laptop, Hunter's business dealings in China, and a host of other things. But my time has expired. I will wrap up, but I would urge this Democratic leadership to hold hearings on the riots that took place across this country last summer. I yield back.
The gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Lynch, is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to thank all the witnesses. Thank you for your service. I would actually not want to know about Hunter Biden's laptop. I'd like to know about the attacks on January 6th, if we could. And Lieutenant Pyatt and General Flynn, again, thank you for appearing today. Lieutenant Pyatt, in your written testimony, you stated that, quote, it was important for the D.C. National Guard to figure out the basics of their new mission. But Major General William Walker has testified that his forces were ready to go well before he finally received Acting Secretary Miller's authorization to deploy to the Capitol. Lieutenant General Pyatt and General Flynn, our committee has obtained evidence that you both recommended that the National Guard deploy to protect other federal buildings and locations in Washington, D.C. to help relieve civilian police and security forces so they could go and defend the Capitol. Is that correct?
Congressman, we received the first request on 1 January, and we spent those days preparing the D.C. National Guard to support Mayor Bowser's request for unarmed traffic control points and crowd control. When the call came in, and it was after 2:22 that afternoon, the urgent request now was to support the Capitol. That was the change of mission. The approval to support.
Whoa. Let me just back. Let me reclaim my time. On January 4th, 2021, at the direction of then Sergeant Ops Michael Stenger and then U.S. Capitol Police Chief Stun, they contacted General Walker to find out how many National Guard he could provide and how fast could he provide them if they were needed at the Capitol on January 6th. So we're talking about an urgent need for the National Guard, D.C. National Guard, on the Capitol, not other buildings. And so I go back to the apparent decision by yourself and General Flynn to deploy National Guard not to the Capitol, but to other federal buildings around D.C. and other monuments. Is that what happened here?
Congressman, on the 3rd and 4th, both the Department of Defense and the Department of the Army asked Capitol Police if they needed additional support, and both times the answer we were told they were not. What happened at the urgent request for now forces to come to the Capitol is we knew we would have to remission them because they did not have their riot control gear with them. We had to get them back to the Armory. We had to reconfigure them and re-equip them to get them forward.
Okay.
On the phone call, what I suggested is we were looking at a range of options. Is there anything we could do immediately in the current posture we were in that would then help relieve others to get to the Capitol? There was not, and we moved on from that.
All right, so let's go to January 6th. This is January 6th at 4:20. Lieutenant Pyatt, you reportedly told Major General Walker that the National Guard should, quote, plan and prepare to transition from traffic control points and be placed around other federal buildings and monuments. This is when it was hitting the fan at the Capitol, at D.C., you know, at the Capitol complex. The Capitol was under attack, and you were deploying or recommending that General Walker deploy people to other buildings. And I can't reconcile that, given the threat that we were under. And I'm just curious, at that moment, what were you thinking? What was your reasoning?
Congressman, I'm sorry, Congressman.
Go ahead.
Congressman, I do not know where that report came from. I denied that. At 4:30 that afternoon, we were minutes away from getting an approved plan from Secretary McCarthy. We had approval at 3 o'clock to use the Guard. We had at 3:04, we had approval for full mobilization of the DC National Guard. What we needed was a new mission. And that new mission is what took time. There was no other seeking approval. We needed to redeploy forces and reconfigure
let me just,
them.
on the chronology, your recollection does not match what the record says. So the 420 call was 80 minutes after Secretary Miller determined that all available forces of the D.C. National Guard are required to reinforce D.C. police and U.S. Capitol Police positions. So it almost seems like we're deploying the National Guard or recommending their deployment away from the Capitol. And I haven't got a good answer on that, and I'm not getting one today.
Congressman, I would refer to the U.S. Army report of operations on 6 January that we submitted to this committee. The timeline was that we had approval at 3 o'clock after the 2:30 phone call. We had approval to mobilize at 3:04. Then we needed to have a plan which required the redeployment of the Guard, reconfiguration, re-equipment, now to go into a mission that they were not previously conducting. They were conducting an unarmed traffic control point. That was the time we needed, and we recalled people from their civilian workforce. What the DC National Guard did in those short hours was extraordinary. Now, when people's lives are on the line, two minutes is too long, but we were not positioned to respond to that urgent request. We had to re-prepare, so we would send them in prepared for this new mission.